Here's my top 5 scientific proofs that atheism is false. I've touched on evolution in the past. I've disproven that theory. Rather, it's not a theory at all. I've touched on the Big Bang and distant starlight and all sorts of things. And I've seen a bunch of atheists try to make response videos to me, and it's fascinating how bad all of their arguments are. Like, they're literally not worth responding to because they really are YouTube, TikTok comment level argumentation. It's usually paired with a lot of name calling as well. No real science, no real reason at all. But what can we expect from people who don't believe in such a thing as objective truth and objective morality? They don't believe that they should be acting honestly in these conversations. Now, right off the bat, I just have to point out that I'm not like a lot of other Christian content creators out there. Instead of trying to use science to prove Christianity or the Bible to be true, I actually go the other way around. I use Christianity, I use the Bible to prove anything at all. The reason for this is because a lot of Christian content creators simply do not believe Romans 1. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. I believe Romans 1 is part of the Word of God, okay? Therefore, I believe that God has already made himself evident to them, the people who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. This includes all of humanity in their sin. God himself has proved his own existence and his divine nature and eternal power to everyone. Everybody knows something of God's divine nature and eternal power, and they are understood so that they're without excuse. That is the difference between me and a lot of other Christians out there, is that I actually believe and teach these scriptures consistently. A lot of other Christians believe that, hey, there's people out there who don't know God, they don't know that God exists, and so we have to give them evidence, science, reason, proof before that we can start using the Bible because they don't believe that God exists. Well, they do. They don't just believe it, they know it in their hearts because God has proved it to them. He has communicated something of his divine nature to all of us, and God is a good communicator, okay? If you want to say that there's some atheist out there who doesn't know that God exists, then you're saying that God is a liar and that he's bad at communicating. So my job as a Christian is not to prove that God exists because that's God's job. He already did that. My job as a Christian is to tell people the good news, the fact that Christ died for sinners, and call out people's sin, that is their sinful way of thinking, the fact that they're suppressing the truth and unrighteousness. The way we do that is by showing that, at least in the atheist case, that their way of thinking leads to absolute nonsense and absurdities. And oftentimes they admit this, and it makes for a completely incoherent, irrational philosophy of life. And of course, nothing good comes out of atheism, something that is objectively wrong. Now let's get to the top 5 scientific proofs. First, you have to understand, though, the definition of science: a systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical natural world through observation, experimentation, and the testing of theories against the evidence obtained. Note here, observation and experimentation, testing of theories, stuff that we can actually see in the real world around us. Starting off at number 5 is our observation and experimentation of genetics. Basically, genes contain the information, the instructions for the cells in your body to create certain things. The information within the DNA tells the cells how to act. Now, this is something that is well studied and everybody agrees upon it because, you know, it's real science rather than coming up with stories about the past. We know that genes contain information, and what do we observe about information in every other area of life? Well, it goes back to a mind. I have this Greek textbook, and you know what this contains? This contains information to be passed on, okay? Now understand this. This book right here is not a mind. This is something that contains information. So it's not like we're saying that DNA is a mind and it has information and it's actually consciously telling the cells in your body to do certain things. No, there's obviously tons of AI out there that copy and send information, but they aren't the origin of information. You have to program these things to mimic human speech and behavior. Again, this is observed, testable, and repeatable in the present. We have seen this. If there is a piece of information out there, its source is a rational mind. Does it really make any sense for me to look at this Greek textbook and suppose that it came about through random chance, you know, the ink came to the paper and just formed this Greek textbook? No, that is not reasonable. There is nothing like that in the created order. Now, atheists have their responses to this, as well as the next 3, and this isn't the greatest proof, because the atheists can always pull out what we would call an atheist of the gaps argument. Oh, science will figure this out someday. There doesn't have to be a God out there who is the ultimate source of the information in DNA. They can always just push it to the side and say, oh, science will figure that out sometime. We have a bunch of other theories that can account for this. And obviously by theories, they mean stories that could account for this, stuff that they just make up. And And honestly, even I myself, I'm not commonly going to use this argument because there's some problems with it. If we are ultimately relying on our own senses and what we believe to be design and information, the only way that we can come to certain knowledge about that is if we ourselves are omniscient, okay? I've used this example before, but let's say there's someone in public, you're at the mall and someone's waving at you, and so you wave back. You saw this information out there, this person waving at you, you assume that, oh, it's designed for you. This also applies to the cosmological argument. You thought the cause of that person waving at you is because they recognize you and they're waving at you, but no, it turns out they're waving at someone behind you. So you, in your own mind, you cannot be totally sure if what you're looking at is real information, real design, if all you have to go on is your five senses and scientific observation. So genetic information within DNA is a good proof, but there's always something that someone can come up with to argue against it. It's a good thing, though, that we know for certain that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and he was in the beginning with God, and all things came into being through him, and apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. God created the world through his one and only begotten Son, Jesus Christ. The ultimate source of all information, genetic information indeed, is God himself. He wrote our genes. He is the one who creates everyone exactly as he designed. And yes, that includes blindness, deafness. The scriptures literally tell us this about God. He decides when someone is born blind or paralyzed or whatever. It is all for the glory of God. Now, on to number 4. For this one, I'm going to take some help from Charles Darwin himself, the famous God-hating atheist who came up with the story, not theory, of evolution. I have a video from a few months ago where I explain why evolution, literally on its own terms, cannot be called a theory because it is impossible to test and observe and prove scientifically. Even if the story of evolution is true, that we used to be fish, our ancestors, gradually evolved over millions of years. That's its story. And even if it's true, you can't scientifically prove that based on Darwin's theory, that is. Anyways, this is what he said. To suppose that the eye with all its inimitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for admitting different amounts of light, and for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberration could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. Yes, I agree, seems absurd because it is absurd. Again, that kind of goes back to number 5. Like, do we really think that this book came about on its own? That's what the theory of evolution says. Something that's way more complex than that book came about on its own. But specifically for number 4, this is what we call irreducible complexity. We're using the eye for the example on this one. Here's a diagram of the eye. Pupil, iris, lens, retina, the optic nerves. You have all these different parts, and what the evolutionists literally cannot even begin to explain is which one of these possibly evolved first. Like, the eye cannot work with one of these missing. Suppose there's an organism out there that doesn't have any eyes, and nature has decided that it's preferable for this creature to have eyes in this environment. Well, first of all, again, with the theory, you couldn't possibly know what's preferable outside of which creatures survive. But let's just say that creature starts evolving the optic nerve first, or the retina. In what world is it biologically advantageous to have part of an eye rather than the whole eye? What in the world would cause a creature to start growing parts of the eye that don't work, knowing that somehow, but they're not knowing because it's not conscious, natural selection, Mother Nature, they use these terms, they personify nature, but nature's not actually making choices because, we can't have a higher power. What could have possibly caused this organism to start growing part of an eye, knowing that this eye, what it's growing, what it's evolving into, is only going to become an eye millions of years down the line, perhaps? It's not going to see the benefits of its evolution in its environment from developing this eye until way later. Also, besides that, even if there is a certain creature, an organism with no eyes, clearly it's fit to survive in its environment. Why would it need to start developing eyes? It's surviving just fine. Also, one last point on the topic of evolution. The existence of dinosaurs, I believe, proves the biblical worldview. I highly recommend you do your research into the dinosaurs, my favorite being the biggest dinosaur to ever live, the Argentinosaurus. It's a sauropod. According to the American Museum of Natural History, one of the very largest, the huge Argentinosaurus may have grown to 90 tons. 90 tons. You can look up all these illustrations, and I just think it's really cool to think about all these animals that Noah brought onto the ark and that Job saw and that Adam named on the first day of his existence. Now let's remember that dinosaur as we take a look at the heaviest land animal today still living, the giant African elephant, up to 6 tons. This thing is tiny compared to the sauropods. We have elephants living today up to 6 tons. They are fit to survive in their environments. Remember, according to evolution, everything can be traced back to a single-celled organism and eventually evolved into everything that we see today. How does it come about that you have an animal 6 tons, then over a few million years, 7 tons, 8 tons, 9 tons, 10 tons, 11 tons, 20 tons, 30 tons, 40 tons, 50 tons. Oh, still not quite fit. There's some more adaptation that it still needs to go through. It's more advantageous to become 60 tons and then 70 and then 80, 90. Like, why? Now, again, atheists on this issue have their answers. They have their arguments and theories, rather stories, of course, as to why these animals got so large, why nature selected for them to become so ginormous. But we know from Genesis chapter 1 that God said, on the 6th day, let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things, and beasts of the earth after their kind. This includes the dinosaurs. Yes, dinosaurs and humans inhabited the same earth on day 6. And it was so. God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, and the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing of the ground after its kind, and God saw that it was good. Real quick, very common misconception is that the dinosaurs and the lions were carnivorous from the beginning. But no, verse 30 says, to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the sky, and to every living thing that creeps on the earth which has life, I have given every green plant for food, and it was so. So no, dinosaurs were not eating each other. Lions weren't chasing after other animals to eat them. No, the result of animals eating each other, including humans eating animals, that is a result of the fall. Death came after the fall. And so this is why creation groans. All of creation. It's not just humanity that is suffering, it is also the animals. And so when we look at these fossils of dinosaurs, we're reminded that, hey, this is what happens when we rebel against the creator, which is what the atheists are doing when they're coming up with all these crazy stories about our past rather than submitting to the truth of God's word. Why were dinosaurs so comically large? Why do any creatures have eyes? Well, because that's how God had designed these things. In the book of Job, God pointed to the behemoth and said, hey, can you subdue this creature? I believe the description of that creature fits a sauropod, but the point is, when Job looks at such a massive animal, the answer is obviously not. I cannot touch this animal. I can't even hurt it with my bare hands. Even with the greatest tools that I can come up with, I can't hurt this thing. And God says, yeah, I made it and I can put it to sleep whenever I want. Dinosaurs declare the glory of God. The millions upon millions of cells in our eyes that are able to take in light and convert that into electrical signals to the brain so you can have this sensation of seeing things, that declares the glory of God, not the glory of fish somehow evolving into humans and geniuses who are able to come up with this idea that our ancestors are fish. Now, moving on to number 3, you can actually see this one with a good pair of binoculars or a telescope. The planet Saturn in our solar system. This is from Wikipedia, but its ring system. Saturn has the most extensive and complex ring system of any planet in the solar system. The rings consist of particles in orbit around the planet made almost entirely of water ice, with a trace component of rocky material. I'm just going to be focusing on Saturn for this video, but when it comes to every planet in our solar system, you can point out something about it that the atheists don't really have a good answer for. Now, according to the atheists, universe is 13 billion years old. That's a made-up number, of course, and as science progresses and we get more real data from the real world we live in, they keep pushing that number further back and back. And they say that our solar system is about 4.5 billion years old, and so Saturn's out there with this ring system made mostly of ice. And there's this thing in our solar system called the sun, and it's constantly giving off UV light radiation. And again, the stuff that I'm telling you here, it's not debatable. It's just how we're interpreting the facts and the evidence that we see in the observable universe. So basically, 4.5 billion years, why is there still this super bright, icy, and reflective ring system that Saturn has? There's a bunch of other things that could impact Saturn's rings as well over millions, billions of years. So essentially, it's estimated that the ring system of Saturn can only last up to 100 million years or so. And yeah, sure, that's a long time, but still way less than 4.5 billion years. The simple biblical answer to this is that, well, Saturn, just like the rest of the stars, and biblically speaking, star is just something that is out there in space and it's a light in the sky. That's what a star is, biblically speaking. So when we're speaking scientifically today, we don't refer to the planets as stars. Just understand that. But based on the biblical terminology, we know that Saturn was made on day 4. Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And, it was so. And there was evening and morning, a 4th day. Saturn is about 6,000 years old, just like the rest of the universe. God designed Saturn to be that way and to be beautiful from the human eye. The heavens are indeed telling the glory of God, and the expanse is declaring the work of his hands. Saturn is telling the glory of God, not the glory of random chance universe popping into existence for literally no reason at all. If you want to learn a bit more about the solar system, then check out this video from Jason Lyle. He's an astrophysicist. He's one of my favorite scientists alive right now. He has a lot of good stuff. Now, moving on to number 2, sticking with the solar system, comets. The existence of comets, atheists cannot explain coherently, that is. Comets are icy, dusty, and rocky bodies that orbit the sun, often exhibiting a bright glowing tail as they approach the sun due to the vaporization of ice and dust, and are considered remnants from the early solar system. And basically, it's a similar issue with the comets, this icy material orbiting close to the sun. How long is that going to last? Well, not billions of years is the answer. And again, this isn't something that's debatable. Atheistic scientists will agree with this analysis. They're not going to last longer than 100,000 years or so. With the technology we have today, we've been able to measure the size of comets. And as they orbit the sun, they lose some mass. And of course, if it goes around again and again and again, it's going to cease to be. Now again, with this proof, along with all the other ones, they're always going to come up with some sort of answer. Oh, there must be some sort of mechanism out there in the universe that we can't prove nor disprove. We haven't observed anything like this. There must be comets just coming from somewhere, being generated out there in the universe. It's always this, again, it's atheism of the gaps. We don't have an explanation, but we just can't accept God being the answer. We can't accept the Bible being the most straightforward, clear answer to all these questions. The earth simply is not as old as you think it is. God created the universe in 6 days, as the Bible says. Now, the number one scientific proof against atheism is the existence of science itself. Science disproves atheism. The concept of science itself disproves atheism. You see, science depends on this thing we call the uniformity of nature. That is, nature, that is the world that we live in, is uniform. That is the same. An example of this is gravity, the warping of space and time, not necessarily a force, but that's irrelevant. All we have to do as Christians to point out the atheists' inconsistencies is ask them why they don't think that gravity is all of a sudden going to stop working, because according to them, we live in a chance universe, random universe. There is no creator who is upholding the world by his very power and consistent nature. Ask them this, and this is a very honest question. It's not aimed to trap them in this, oh, we're better than you atheists. No, genuinely try to answer this question. The fact is they can't. So why do you, Mr. Atheist, think that you're not going to start floating up in the sky within 5 seconds from now? Again, the atheists love to think that they have all the facts and the evidence on their side, but just simply ask them, to scientifically prove that he's not going to start floating up into space 5 seconds from now. Number one, he can't do that because we can't observe the future. Nobody has observed the future and tested the future. Now, secondly, the attempted answer that every atheist is going to try to give you is that, oh, in the past, I haven't started floating up, and so it's reasonable to conclude that in the future, I'm not going to start randomly floating into the sky as well. Now, this right here is textbook circular argumentation, and that's fallacious. I am justified in my belief that I'm not going to start floating into the sky 5 seconds from now because 10 seconds earlier, 5 seconds after that, I didn't start floating up into the sky. So the atheist's answer here is that he believes that the future is going to remain uniform. It's going to be similar to the past because in the past, the future was like the past. So the future is like the past because the future is like the past. It's so fascinating how the atheists, when you actually get them into a corner like this, they do the very thing that they accuse me of doing, which is saying that the Bible is true because the Bible says it's true. I have never made that argument. They think that I make that argument, but I don't. And this right here has been a problem for atheists for centuries now. Like, their very claim to science and knowledge and facts and reason and all this stuff, observation, testability, all of it rests on this fallacious argument that upholds their scientific observation. Oh, the future's like the past because the future's like the past. This is why I put this argument at number one. It's because it literally cannot be responded to by atheists. They have no rational explanation for why science even exists in the first place, why nature remains generally the same. And not only that nature remains generally the same, but why us humans even assume that in the first place. Why don't we wake up hoping that we're not going to float into the sky? You know, after all, chance universe. That's how we should be acting if atheism were true. But no, biblically, there's a very clear answer. Genesis chapter 8. God promises, while all the days of the earth remain, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. We are justified in assuming that the future, even though we haven't observed the future, we can't scientifically prove this objectively with only our own five senses that the future is going to be like the past. We are still justified in assuming this because our creator God, who loves his creation, upholds it with consistency because he's rational and he does not change, and he has this end goal of glorifying the Godhead. So we as Christians have an explanation for why science itself even exists, whereas atheists don't. They're using science, something that God created, as a gift for us to use and examine and glorify his creation and give thanks to him for giving us life. The atheists and non-believers in general, they take that gift, all the gifts that God has given us, and they use the gifts to argue against God. And this is how I've demonstrated Romans 1 to be true. These people know science, they know facts, logic, reason, etc. They know that we should be acting in a righteous way. We should be thinking rationally. They're taking all this truth that they know in their hearts. God is real. He is true. He's consistent. He's upholding this world with his nature. He's good. He has this law that we live under. He's taking all this stuff that he knows to be true in his heart, and he's suppressing it to believe the lie. He exchanged the truth of God for the lie, and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the likeness of corruptible man, and of birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. Anyways, please like this video and subscribe if you have not already. Comment down below what you want to see in future videos. That'll be all for today. Love you guys so much.